Okay, my name is Paul Wagner. I'm with Filecoin Foundation. I guess I should back up. I have a slide there. That's me. I have about 15 years of experience in the data center industry, both from building data centers when I was younger all the way to sales engineering and now sales and a lot of very complex integrations over the years all around the world. I started my career at Sun Microsystems, which actually built the NFS file system. Raise your hand if you've used NFS before.
Yes.
And I am based in Austin, Texas, or usually on an airplane or in a hotel room. Today we're going to cover a new business model template that has been built out both by myself, but mainly by a person that has run large parts of our crypto econ lab team. There are multiple business model templates out there. We're hoping that this one is very easy to read and understand. I will walk through the basic flow of it, but I will say that it does take about 1 hour of testing on your own to understand your input variables and how they will affect your P and L. On the left, I will have the links. I also have an IPFS folder with the video that has already been recorded and the spreadsheet and these slides, so you can access them in China. Okay, some basics about the spreadsheet that we'll go over. The first thing you can do is you won't need to make a copy if you choose not to use the Google Sheet. But the basic way to look at this is we do this on a 7-year basis. We're talking about quarters. Cells that are inputs are in green. The value flows can be adjusted in fill or fiat. In this case, it's only currently US dollar based, but you could change it. And most of the data flows downward. So when you're going to make changes, you first will make changes to your raw capacity, and then all of your other values will start from the top down. So it's pretty straightforward. There is somebody that is supporting this document for the next month. I will provide their information at the end of it. But this is meant to be a very solid framework that you can adjust the variables for charging in fiat, not charging in fiat, fill plus, not using fill plus, and also adjusting for the Filecoin price, which I'll use in the example. There are 5 tabs that you can modify. We will go through those in detail, and then I'll show you the renderings that come out of this spreadsheet. I assume that some of the larger storage providers already have their own business model template. Therefore, this will likely not apply to you, but you're welcome to look at it and provide feedback or retool your entire business based off of this. But by no means are we telling anyone that this is conclusive. I have my own opinions about some variables on this. I am not a fill plus supporter. I'll be the first in the room to say that. I think everyone should be trying to build a business that you can charge for, because fill will eventually be worth much less than it is now. Therefore, you cannot run your business based on fill at even $4. The spreadsheet also walks through on a quarterly basis, so you will walk left to right to look at those P&L statements. There's also some sensitivity analysis. I'm not going to cover that in detail, partly because I was not the person that built that portion. I can get support for that. But the most important thing to remember here is that we're doing this on a quarterly basis across 7 years. There are some CapEx measurements or points in place that you can change for your current setup or your future setup. I know that everyone has similar cost structures probably on a hard drive basis, but on the actual JBODs, CPU, GPU, network connectivity, everyone has different inputs. Those are accounted for in this spreadsheet. So for support on this, go back to for support on this, there's Mara McCone, she is on Slack. The global storage provider community also is a good channel where this will likely become more discussed, as this was released last week. I expect a lot of people to question some of the inputs and modify them accordingly. And if you have questions and answers for me, those can be found here as well. I'll put this up, but I want to walk through the spreadsheet a little bit to talk about some of the basics so you can better understand what you can do with them. Okay, the first tab that we're working with here is in the lower left. I'm going to shrink this just because we have the translation service up here. Okay, the first tab in the lower left is the model. This one here, your first input will usually be your raw byte capacity. In this case, we could change it. I think 1 JBOD is a good start of about 1 pip. So we can modify this value here, or we could try it. Sorry, it's and we'll work with the values that are in place. As you go over, this assumes that you're adding capacity on a quarterly basis. So as you add capacity, certain variables will change. There is an assumption in place that the equipment is amortized over a 5-year period. And the redundancy factor here is accounting for the fact that we currently have to store 2 copies, 1 sealed and 1 unsealed. So again, raise your hand if you're a new storage provider or a storage provider that is going to be expanding capacity. 1, 2, potentially 3. I think this will be very useful for you if you have not built out a complex spreadsheet. This is probably a very good starting point. But where I like to start on this spreadsheet is the COGS sheet, cost of goods sold is the English word we use. There's an assumption here that a JBOD costs about $30,000 US. I know probably just in Shenzhen that price is closer to 22,000, maybe even less. A JBOD, of course, probably holding between 1 and 1.92 pip if you're buying the really high-end equipment. The other COGS that it accounts for here is your sealing capacity, which you can actually change the variable here to be a different value if you plan to use sealing as a service. So you can play around with that as well. And then the CPU equipment costs are here. Again, the one thing I want to note is that this is done on a unit basis, not done on a raw footprint of buying Dell equipment plus JBODs and then putting it in a rack. So you'd be looking at this based on the incremental costs that are being accounted for here, not the raw CapEx, but we'll look at that briefly here. Now, on the other capital expenditure portion, we cover electricity. We also cover, we assumed that 8 racks per kilowatt. Is everyone following here that I'm going down to populate the values in the spreadsheet? Is anyone lost? Raise your hand if you're lost. I'll stop and back up. Good, okay. We make some assumptions that the co-location space is a fixed price. We know that this is different around the world. We know that the pricing models can be different. Perhaps maybe you even have a co-location space that doesn't cost anything. Every value in here can be 0. It cannot. If you put in a null value, you might be surprised. You'll probably still be okay. There is error handling built in.
A quick question. In the equipment cost, did you account for all the PCs that servers one would need for the whole setup,
Yes.
which includes a PC1, CC, and all that.
But it is done on an incremental basis based on how much storage you have. So again, if you are using excess equipment, I would just set the values to 0. Or if you are using a cloud service to provide a portion of that. But this does assume that you are building racks, racking that equipment, and putting it into a data center and paying for network fees. Now, I have an opinion about the network fees here, being a former network engineer. I think most people should just buy a circuit, a 1 gig circuit, and pay for it. We did it on an incremental basis here, as you can see here. And that's based on per gigabit. Again, you can play around with these values. This is not something you can do in 30 minutes. It took me about 2 hours to master this. I'm happy to walk through it. I'm not going to do it on this laptop because I'm going to throw this laptop out that window at the end of this. It's okay, I'll buy a new one. It'll be a great representation of the problem. There are some personnel assumptions in here. Those could be set to 0 if you're working for free. But again, as you change those values, they will populate the values to the right, and you can see here we have our quarterly outputs based on the inputs that were put in. A couple more cogs I want to go over here. It does produce very pretty graphs. You can put those on your refrigerator next to your children's pictures. A lot of this you will see when we look at the balance of things looks more like a fill-on-fill return or a finance play. I also have an opinion about that because when we talk about the actual services revenue tab, which we'll get to, I'm going to talk about the fill revenue tab right now. A lot of these values can be populated when you click this orange button here. Unfortunately, this assumes that you are using Google Drive. If you are not using the Google tools, raise your hand if you do not have access to Google tools. Everyone's got VPN, perfect, great. If you don't have VPN, I'll sell you a VPN through my company. It's a nominal cost. We have endpoints in all of the United States. So you can change the fill price here. I think it's 411. What's the fill price today? Somebody shout it out. 4. We'll go with 4. Okay. So you can change the fill price here. You can also assume that the fill price compounds. You can also set the fill price to 0.10, and I actually recommend 0.01, the lowest value possible. I recommend people doing that to see, because this model is very well thought out, assuming that fill is worth nothing or worth a very nominal amount and it's just used to post collateral. Okay, my favorite tab. There is a nice input value here for charging for per terabyte per month costs. This will vastly change the output when you change those values. You can also assume that certain things cost more or less if you are sealing as a service. And then you can assume that a percent of these deals might be fill plus. I think you should set all of them to 0 if you would like to see what it looks like if you were running your business without the hiccups of fill plus, because the Filecoin network is a permissionless public blockchain. It should not require anyone except for those that are willing to pay to utilize the service. Now, after you've filled out these values, it will change the quarterly statements above. It also has more pretty graphs down here that you can play with. The more important view that you're probably going to be concerned about is the summary statement. Here too, you will see more graphs that will, interesting enough that it probably is the version of Excel here that is having problems. So use this in Google if you can. If you cannot get it in Google, I will get it fixed in Excel. We're very heavy in Google. So That doesn't mean that, do not try and fix this on your own. If it's not working in Excel, let me know. We just have been using it in Google. So this will give you a summary view of the input values you have inputted. It will be pretty shocking when you run this with no fill plus. This is basing it off probably about a week ago on the current block schedule reward. You will see that if you start out with a lot of CapEx, you will not make money for 3 years. So you have to go slow, or you will have to borrow money or sell equipment at the wrong price, for that matter. Again, this is a very complex spreadsheet. I do not have time to go over all of it. This is a nice P&L statement. It does cover EBITDA in case you are looking to raise money. This is always good for somebody that needs a data room and you just want to give them this and they want to play with it. Again, this is a framework. It will probably see some iterations, but not many. This was a deliverable. The deliverable is done. Now what we're looking for is people to utilize it and provide feedback, and we'll make small incremental changes. I do think this is much easier to use than compared to the website that Starboard has shown, the calculator. Again, this is far more specific to the type of infrastructure you have, to the type of lending requirements you have, to your power, to even your personnel. And again, this is all available in multiple locations in case you cannot get to it. I have it here. It is going to be in this slide deck. There is also a video link from the person that did more of the calculations, Dave Costanero. He was on the Crypto Econ Lab team, but he contracts for a lot of blockchain companies. So we had to have him look at this from a third-party perspective, and then we had storage providers and then internal members that are working towards the client development, develop some of the values based on there that we know are important. So you can download this here. You can get it off of IPFS. It also just has a Google Drive link to the actual spreadsheet, and then we can go from there. And again, if you need to get a hold of me, here is my information. So maybe that QR code, you won't be able to see it. But that's it for now on this. Again, this is a download and play. And if you have questions, there was the channel in there. You can send me a question. I will probably relay you to the people's responsibility that it is to answer the questions. Again, this is a very good template. It's one of the best I've seen. Although I know it does not apply to SPs that are currently in their own development cycles and or equipment cycles. But it's worth taking a look at, and if you have questions, please ask me questions. Thank you.